Remember, Anne, did you want to speak or wait until after we wrap it up with process?
Yeah, I think we'll run it the same way we have been, where questions will get queued up in the Q&A room. Fiona will run through that in housekeeping. So we might as well get underway. It's 7:02. I see a fair number of people who are sitting in. Represents the the Westboro Community Association. I see Judy here from the BIA. So we're getting together tonight to take a look. And I'm sorry, is there an application in on this one yet?
An application was filed about a week and a half ago. We're just going through the process of sort of deeming the completeness of it, and I'm sure that we'll start the process for circulations and so on shortly.
Okay, so the information's not quite online yet then?
No, not quite yet.
Okay, so it's an application that is in process at the city for 403 Richmond. So this is the Tubman site. Mastercraft Starwood is proposing the building that you see in front of you. Just speaking very bluntly, I was expecting to see a taller proposal for this site. I think that unlike some of the other proposals that are in the ward, this one is starting in approximately the right ballpark. I know that my council colleagues are going to be relatively sympathetic to it, but the thing tonight is to ask your questions about the building, and certainly you're absolutely free to state an opinion on it. And then coming out of this meeting, generally what will happen is a process that is really several months long of providing comment, making suggestions for how the building could be improved. My job is to go to the city and to the developer and ask for changes where I agree with the community that changes could make this a better building or a building that better fits in the neighborhood. We have this evening Anne O'Connor, and maybe just wave.
Hello, everyone.
The name tag is right there, right? So Anne is the planner on the file. She's going to be really sort of quarterbacking comments that are going to come in from a number of different city departments. She's going to be applying her professional lens to the suitability of this building to get the zoning amendment that it's going to require. And she's going to be taking into account the feedback that is coming from the community, all leading up to a point, I don't know, are we 9 months away? A year away, 9 months from a planning committee date, Anne?
Earliest I'd say would be 6 months, so March. That
Okay.
would be earliest.
That'd be pretty aggressive.
Yep.
Yeah, so at some point this spring or summer, Anne will need to write a report that recommends that the building, as it has evolved through the conversation, be approved or not by City Council, and that will then go to a planning committee vote and a City Council vote. So with that, I'm just going to ask Fiona to give us an overview of how to pose your questions, and then we'll turn it over to Rod Leahy for a presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Okay, so you'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there are 3 buttons: chat, raise hand, and Q&A. So the main one will be the Q&A. As Jeff said, we'll do a high-level presentation, and then we'll move into the Q&A. So to type a question, you just click the Q&A button, you type in your questions, and then I will read them out loud, and then once I click the button I just clicked, you'll be able to see the question in the Q&A box as well, as it's also being answered out loud. In the interest of fairness, as I go through and moderate the questions, I'm going to try and give everyone a chance to have their questions read. So if you type in 3 questions in a row, don't be offended if I only read one. I'll get back to you on the second round. And I'm going to try to eliminate as much as possible repetitive questions. So several people may have a similar question about, traffic or something like that. So if I feel as though it's already been addressed, I will potentially skip it. This is tentatively going to 8:30, so we'll get through as many questions as we can. If you feel as though your question hasn't been answered, shoot us an email and we will absolutely make sure that your question is answered. This isn't the be all and end all for information. Like Jeff said, it's your first touch. We are recording this as well, and it will be on YouTube at some point. So if you have to step out, or if a neighbor of yours couldn't make it, it will be available online for them to review later. So with that, I will turn it over to.
I'll just quickly say that in the course of the Q&A, as always in our meetings, we do ask that people be respectful. Fiona will not shy from asking challenging questions that you've typed in of the developer, but where there's just outright abuse or disrespect, we'll skip over those questions. Rod, what does Mastercraft Starwood want to build, and what kind of zoning permission do they need to build it?
Well, we're seeking to build a 9-story mixed-use building. It's a 9-story building, as you can see from our cover page, stepping down to 4 stories as it moves through into the residential neighborhood. So, I think it's safe to say everybody on listening in right now, I'm sure knows the site. It's currently it's a Tubman funeral site. This was a presentation that we worked on. The development team that went through as our sort of pre-design and meeting with the community in the original before sort of design, just beginning to set out some development principles. John Smith at the end is going to go through and speak to this a little bit more in detail. You can see passing through, we basically looked at the project obviously in context. We look at it from both a city scale, a neighborhood, and a street scale, and begin to sort of development sort of principles of design and how we begin taking a project like this forward. Again, I would say that I think people know the site. It's an interesting site. I grew up in Westboro, lived in Westboro actually most of my life. Quite thrilled to be able to work on a site like this and bring change forward. We study, of course, neighborhood context as well as sort of evolving neighborhood context and how Westboro has beginning to grow as part of the city, as it has, of course, how the city grows as well. So the site makes up of the, it's an interesting site, so it currently makes up 2 zonings. It's, if you can see my mouse, so this is the TM zone, that's the current zone of the Tubman Funeral Home, as well as the adjacent residential house immediately north of the subject property. So what we propose on this site is to basically develop a 9-story building within the TM zone, and then stepping down through to a 4-story building that occupies part of the residential zone with a large side yard, or in this case, it's a rear yard adjacent to the existing residential community on Roosevelt. One of the key design features in the in our proposal was to restrict the commercial area to what we thought was the appropriate area along Richmond Road and not extend the commercial into the residential neighborhood. So in simplistic terms, again, this is I should point out, this is a zoning as opposed to a site plan application. So it's important to realize, these are basically guiding principles that we will then develop more in the future into actual documents for site plan approval. But one of the definite guiding principles was restrict the commercial encroachment into the residential neighborhood by cutting it off some sort of 100 feet or so into the project. The balance of the site then is essentially residential as it moves through on the ground floor. And then, of course, the other principle, we wanted to maintain the existing trees along Roosevelt. There's a beautiful mature trees. We don't want to lose those. So as we develop this, we'll be working with arborists to make sure that everything we do protects these trees. Further developments, we'll see walkways. These are private yards right now within the within the project for the ground floor units, and we'll have walkways as we develop the site plan that go out to the sidewalk to really give that sort of residential feel. Another key feature of the site development was the way we've dealt with access to the parking. All of the parking is underground. Access is at the extreme north end of the site, and we come in through a two-way system that's actually set back significantly, some 25 feet from the rear property line, and allows a two-way traffic system that if someone comes in and drops off people here, there's a lay-by. You can actually go by and then come in here, turn around and go back out again. So you won't tie up traffic on the street. We have the way the building has been designed is essentially it's a 4-story portion in this area here. So within this is the R4 zone that exists right now. And this is a 4-story portion in this area. It steps up to 7-story and then up to 9 stories here. And then this is a combined mechanical room and amenity space on the 10th floor. We've increased the side yard setbacks from essentially in the TM zone against TM, it's a 0 setback up against the residential. It's I believe a 1.5. We're showing here a 6-meter setback along the eastern edge of the property. 0 only for when it's commercial against commercial, which is this area here. So the way the building works, underground parking, we've got, we're still working out the parking requirements on the site, whether we go 2 levels or 3 levels. And more importantly, we go to the ground floor. Zoom away a bit. So I'm just waiting for this gets a little heavier just because of the trees. All right. Sorry, delay. So you can see, the way the building works on the ground floor on Richmond Road, essentially this is a large commercial area that could be split into smaller stores or one large store. We imagine it's going to be split into a number of, three smaller entities, but it could work out to one large area. We're showing what we've done was try to create a large sort of plaza area at the corner of the site to create a sort of a public meeting space here. It could be an extension to a restaurant, or it could just be open space with some chairs, similar to match what's done across the street. There's a small area that the Starbucks has across Roosevelt, and of course you've got the large public area, the outdoor area of the Clock Tower restaurant across the street. We have another large area over this area too that could extend into up to the parking, up to the city sidewalk. The building has been aligned on Roosevelt Street to be in line with the building. Roosevelt Street and Richmond Road aren't perpendicular to each other. There's an angle, so you create an architecture that's aligned with the angular street of Richmond Road, and then it squares to Roosevelt Street, creating some interesting geometries at the intersection. We actually set our building back from Richmond Road. There's a 0 setback requirement along a traditional main street. Although we felt that's always sort of questionable. We would like to have at least 5 meters of sidewalk to make a comfortable space. So we have set this back more than we have to. Coming past the commercial, this is access here and potential access into the back for loading. So loading trucks could stay on Roosevelt and come in the back way and into it, or they'll come in through here, and there's enough room to work around. So vehicular access and the lobby access is off of this, we'll call Porte Cochere, that comes in off of Roosevelt and allows for parks or cars to park here for a short term and then come in and do a 3-point turn and go out, or go down into the parking garage. say all the required parking and visitor parking is below grade. The ground floor is essentially made up of a lobby area on the north end of the site, adjacent to the porte cochere. And then there's some townhouse units across the front that have direct access to grade and to the street. There's in the back here, again, we're still developing it, but this would be garbage or amenity space, depending on how we work out the garbage. Amenity area at the back here onto a small terrace to get some light into the amenity room. Going up the building, right now we're showing a large number of small units. It's more a graphic representation. We decided to show sort of the most possible number of units, realizing as we begin to develop this, we can easily take 3 one-bedroom units and turn them into 2 two-bedroom units. We have opportunities to make 3-bedroom units in various places. So right now we're just showing basic breakdown of units. One of the design features try to reduce sort of the overlook that's caused through the condominiums into residential areas, and is we've gone with French balconies. So these are balconies that basically open up and give you a visual access outside without going outside. So we can create quite a clean aesthetic to the building. Basically, as we move up the building, we begin setting back. So if I go to this would be the 5th floor. So it takes a while. These drawings are a little large. So this is the essentially the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor plan. And as we move up to the 5th floor, you can see we set back here some about 25 feet in total to this line. And this becomes a terrace on the roof of the 4th floor or 5th floor terrace. And this is associated essentially with these 2 units here. They would get the use of these terraces. And then as we step back again, this would be the 5th to the 7th floor. As we move up to this is the 8th and 9th floor. We're stepping now on top. So this is on the 8th floor. There's a terrace for these 2 units. They're stepping back. And so this steps back another close to 7 meters. And the idea is that you'll see on a slide is that we create an angular plane that comes in off of this setback line here, or the property line. We come in 7.5 meters. We go up 15 meters. And then we go on an angular plane, and we have our building sort of work within that 45-degree angle. And it's guidelines that have come out of the development of the TM zone. This is one of the few cases when we've been actually able to make that work quite nicely. Again, on the final, this is a very schematic approach to the mechanical area. And we haven't even worked out mechanical systems yet or how much space we're going to need. But this is basically showing a roof terrace on the north side as well as a potential roof terrace on the south side. It may be in the end that it's only on this side or it's only on this side. It just depends on how much mechanical space we're going to need. The building, again, preliminary elevations. We're trying to do something a little different using essentially almost like a limestone type base with more and again, the details as we develop it, there's a little bit more tactile on the lower levels, more smaller materials, brick will be used, but keeping a more of a monotone approach and really trying to create that layering of building that you're seeing in, let's say, other projects done recently where you have a stone base and brick on the upper floors. We're trying to do it a little differently here. We're working with both design elements in terms of window types and massing, use of balconies, use of terraces, We have a setback, as you can see. This is the angular plane I was talking about coming back from the. So this is, sorry, it's west elevation is Roosevelt Street. So these are the. This is the Port Cochera entrance, as well as the lobby entrance into the main building. These are the townhouse units that run along the street, and there actually can be 2-story units within this space. And this is the higher retail area along the going toward Richmond Road and the plaza area that you've seen. As you step up, this steps in this way, and you can see this is this angular plane that we talk about and how to keep out of that area, and it allows for good transition. The idea is when you're in the adjacent properties, you're not seeing the mass of these buildings or stepping out of view. So every 3 meters up, you have to step back 3 meters, which we've actually increased that in our setbacks, as you can see. The south elevation is the elevation along, it's a narrow elevation along Richmond Road. This is the retail portion along Richmond Road, and you can see the 2-meter setback along. That doesn't really read on this drawing, but this is a 2-meter setback for the upper 5 floors. And this is again the southern, the north elevation, showing the reduced sort of windows on this side, and then the larger windows on the parts of the building further back, just trying to lighten the overall architecture. And of course, the east elevation, this whole area is behind the existing restaurant right now. And then this becomes basically a wall on the east side. We did a building in, just a quick sort of mass in this building in location. In our next steps, we'll be sort of showing how the rest of the street sort of develops under the current guidelines. So this is an anomaly only when you look at the building on this side, because looking toward the west, it's fairly well been developed with the buildings across the street at Westboro Station, as well as the exchange, the domicile building. We did a few perspectives to sort of just to give a better feeling of the setback. This is this stepping back from the north, stepping back as it moves south toward Richmond Road. This is a view from Winston Avenue, again showing the stepping back, and the view along Roosevelt. And you can see this is this idea, this 45-degree angular plane, how the building, depending on where you are, begins to disappear, the upper floors from Roosevelt Street. This is this corner area, and I have to say this is an area, we're still developing the architecture of this as we move it along, but the idea is to create this large plaza area at the corner, and then turn the corner down and begin to look at that sort of 4-story aesthetic that's in the TM zone right now. And then we did a few close-up views beginning to show this townhouse expression down at the lower level, the large plaza area at the corner of Roosevelt and Richmond Road. This is just the widened sidewalk on Richmond Road, trying to increase it from that very narrow strip that's traditionally there along Richmond Road, try to widen that out. And then just a view down Roosevelt with an approximation of where these trees are right now. And we've been working with the arborists again to make sure that what we do will save these trees. They're an important feature, obviously, on the streetscape, and it's important for the development team too to keep these mature trees. We prepared shadow studies, and I think the best way will, once this goes on DevApps, to take a look at it closer. It's hard to see, it's such a small scale, but we basically, as you know, we look at the sort of the 4 key dates, and we look at from 8 o'clock to 4. We've been asked recently, and we'll probably update this too, as we move through the system, to actually look at 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. as well. So I'm sure that will come up in the actual review from the planning department. And we've created a preliminary site plan, which would be moving forward into the site plan process when we're further along the zoning process. So it begins in this to begin setting out sort of project numbers, numbers of units, number of one bedroom units. Right now we're showing 170 units. Parking, bicycle, this is a site we would probably, guarantee you putting 1-to-1 parking for bicycles. We're analyzing what sort of vehicular parking we should use for a site like this. We haven't nailed that down just yet, and we're getting close to it. I think right now we're looking at a 0.5 plus 0.1, but so that's my presentation. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but I'd like to turn it over to John to talk about policy. And if there's any drawings you want up, John?
Yep. All right, great. Thanks, Rod. So I'm sure many of you know me from my past life with the City of Ottawa. I'm John Smith. I retired from the city. I'm now doing some consulting. So I was retained by Mastercraft Starwood to help them out with this project, sort of a strategic planning advisory services. Matt McGilligan with FOTEN is also on the project. So he and I are sort of tag team on the planning side of things. So maybe, Rod, if you can go back to the development principles again, and just to walk through those things very quickly. And Rod gave a very high-level overview of the development principles that we collectively developed right at the outset. And this was before we were actually into the process of developing sort of the overall concept for the site. And it was felt important to really get a good understanding sort of the broader policy framework that existed within the city in the context of its official plan, the directions that are being pursued by the city through its new official plan, and then also really looking at the site and the situation of the property to understand how we can start articulating some broad principles that advance the objectives that the city has expressed through its policy documents at 3 basic levels. So the city context, the neighborhood context, and then also the site context. So what we did here was develop these, and we had an early discussion with the various community associations, Westboro Beach, Westboro, and also the BIA. We also had a discussion with some of the neighbors early in the process to talk about the overarching development principles, seeing whether or not we accurately captured sort of what the sense was of the official plan and the things that we need to be concerned about to really set the stage for then moving towards developing the project that Rod has now presented to you. So from a city context point of view, it was really looking at the city's objectives for increasing the percentage of growth in the urban area through intensification at key growth areas. And this is a theme that's really coming out quite strong through the new official plan with the broad-based policy directions that council has already established, where they're now moving forward to looking to achieve 60% of the growth of the city by 2046 within the urban area, which is a very aggressive target. And that's really a big sort of context within which we have to start to look at these sites, and also taking advantage of the proximity to high order transit. Next slide there, Rod. So again, this is picking up again on that continued theme of sustainability mixed use projects and the objectives around increasing density around LRT stations, and all about sort of increasing opportunities for people to make choices to use transit as opposed to private automobiles, where you have sites that are in ready walking distance to high order transit. And as we know, the Dominion BRT station is going to be converted into an LRT station through the stage 2 LRT. So again, this site is about 250 to 300 meters walking distance from that station location. So very ideally located to have an increased population that can use transit as this primary mode of moving to the city or through the city. Next slide. So again, this is all about looking at providing opportunities for viable residential accommodation in a range of dwelling types. And this is all about this whole notion of complete communities, providing offerings for different types of residential units to support sort of diverse communities. And clearly when you're dealing with development opportunities around high order transit, there clearly is an option for more intense apartment style development, at the same time respecting the character that we have in established communities, and hence the focus on the townhouse type units on the ground floor or the lower 2 floors. Next slide. And then we start moving into neighborhood context. And I think this is one of the really telling images that we see in the Westboro area. It's an area that we've seen where the western approach to the Westboro village has really evolved into that mid-rise gateway into the village as a whole, as you're moving from west to east, with the exchange, with some of the buildings that have been happening at the old regional head or the old regional site, some of the older buildings from the 1960s closer to the Dominion Transitway station, and then the newer project that happened across the road with the Clock Tower pub. So you're really seeing this evolving character. And this property sits right within sort of that overall framework and has an opportunity to continue to contribute to that creation of that gateway image with that medium density, really taking advantage of the proximity to the Dominion Station. Next slide. So again, getting back to the neighborhood context, recognizing the importance of integrating with the commercial Main Street along Richmond and also the residential fabric along Roosevelt. Again, this site being very unique in that it is extending down Roosevelt. So as Rod indicated, there is a need and an opportunity to really start embracing that residential character, but focusing the commercial on the Richmond side. And then also ensuring that we develop at a scale and density that's consistent with the planned function for both main streets and for sites that are in proximity to transitway stations. So again, this whole notion of medium profile type development. Next slide. Again, on the neighborhood context, one of the key things that obviously there's a concern about is ensuring economic activity along our traditional main streets, and that requires sort of making sure you have the population base that can support that sort of main street commercial activity, becoming more and more important as we're seeing the changes that are happening as far as the retail marketplace is concerned, and being even more exacerbated now by the COVID-19 situation that we're dealing with. Next slide. And then we started looking more closely at the details of the site development and urban design. And again, looking at the details on how you can contribute to the dynamic node that's being created by the mix of medium and high profile development that we're find evolving into this area. Next slide. Again, making sure that the architecture is of high quality, that we have good public realm conditions being created through the project, and that it respects and picks up on the cadence and the character that you find along both the residential street along Roosevelt and the commercial pattern that you find along Richmond Road, and then also looking at opportunities for open space elements that could be introduced to really enhance the public realm experience in the area. Next slide. And again, this is probably more the nuts and bolts stuff, continuous at-grade commercial, want the ground level or lower level residential along Roosevelt. And again, as Rod pointed out, the importance of recognizing that we have mature vegetation that we want to try to ensure we retain, and with the introduction of potentially additional street trees, to in particular down Roosevelt, to really pick up on the character that you find along the residential streets flanking and moving into Richmond Road. Next slide. So basically, the approvals that are being sought with the applications that were submitted, there's two. There's an amendment that's being requested to the Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan. It's not to the policies of the plan. The policies of the plan actually support what's being proposed, but there's a schedule in the plan which is identified on this sheet on this slide that sets in place height limits or height restrictions for various sites along Richmond Road. And the Tubman site has identified on this schedule 4 to 6 story height limit. And as you can see where we have the blue areas, and these are the areas that are south and to the east, and in fact also exist to the west, where we have that 9-story built fabric that's evolved, and that's allowed to continue to evolve as you move towards Churchill Avenue. And this site, again, being as large as it is, exhibits opportunity and potential to be developed within 9 stories. So we're asking for an amendment to this particular schedule of the Richmond Road West Grove secondary plan to change the height from 4 to 6 stories to a 9-story height, similar to the other blues that have been identified on that map. The other change that we're asking for is a rezoning. 2 key elements to that rezoning. As Rod pointed out, the project is actually extending into one property that is now zoned R4 that Mastercraft Starwood has acquired to provide for that development of an appropriate buffer between the project and the residential development along Roosevelt. So the intent is to include that in the TM zone, but not develop it the same way that you would see the other area of the TM zone being developed. And then the other key change that's being requested right now, the TM zone that applies on the Tubman site has a height limit of 20 meters, which is 6 stories as per the secondary plan schedule that we just talked about. And the ask is to go up to a 30-meter height limit, which allows for the additional 3 stories. And then we've also got the rooftop projection that Rod had discussed in terms of the mechanical penthouse and some of the amenity space that's being proposed on top of the project. So those are really, that's the essence of the applications. It's an amendment to the secondary plan, but only to a schedule. What's being proposed is entirely consistent with the broad directions of the official plan. And in fact, the development principles really drew themselves out of the broad principles of the official plan, as well as the directions that are coming out of the new official plan. And then the zoning change is really effectively the increase in height from the 20 to 30 meters, and then including that one property as part of the TM zone. So that's the quick overview, I think, from our team's point of view.
Perfect. So with that, unless Jeff wants to say anything, we will move into the Q&A. And thank you for your presentation. Okay, so I have 15 questions so far. Feel free to keep typing them in and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, first question. Given the impact of the pandemic, how does a project like this and other initiatives aimed at intensification of population in relatively small community mirror valid concerns about social distancing? Also, with more people working from home as the result of health and safety concerns, how are residents of the neighborhood supposed to work from home in the middle of a major construction zone? I live on Roosevelt and have worked from home for many years. The endless construction project of semi-detached homes are disruptive to working from home. This kind of project will make working from home unattainable for an extended period of time.
So in response to the question on the issue around the pandemic, I think we're all hoping that this is not going to be completely the new normal. I think it's clearly changing the way that society generally recognizes the importance of how we interact with one another. But the expectation is that this will settle down to a point, and it does not diminish the other key important things that we also have to continue to be aware of in terms of the other big drivers that are impacting civilization as a whole, and the whole notion around making sure that we work within our means, that we provide for development that's sustainable on a whole bunch of different fronts, environmentally, from a transportation point of view, social equity point of view. And that all calls us to look at maximizing opportunities at key locations within existing urban areas for increased development. So we're not continuously expanding around the edges and taking away environmental lands or taking away prime agricultural land. So again, it's a balance that has to be reached. We've got policy documents that council has adopted that we have to work within. We've got policy documents that the province has established that we have to work within. The pandemic situation is a new wrinkle that's being added into it. I think part of what the new official plan is trying to get its head wrapped around is also how do we start dealing with these disruptors, these big drivers of change that are coming at us very quickly so that the city can respond in a way that's resilient, adaptable, and able to overcome some of the challenges or take advantage of opportunities. So it's a factor that's out there, but it can't be the sole driver in terms of a determiner as to whether or not intensification is the right thing to do. I think at the end of the day, it still is the right thing to do. Clearly, council has that on its radar both now and moving forward. In terms
John,
of disruption, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I think the question was sort of, how are people going to work from home while you're pouring concrete?
Yeah, that was my next, that was moving into that one. So in terms of working from home, fully acknowledge and appreciate that that's an area of concern. And I think, especially when you're in areas of the city where there is going to be ongoing continuing development activity, it is going to be a disruption. I don't have a true answer for it, but I know that there are mitigations that would be undertaken in terms of things that would be put in place with respect to dealing with respecting the constraints of the noise bylaws, making sure that proper techniques are used when construction activity is being undertaken to minimize disruption. It's a reality. You can't stop the world. And I think similarly, you're going to see the same thing happening with the LRT construction. Once the stage 2 project starts moving to Dominion Station, that's also an element of disruption that's going to be occurring sort of in that immediate area. So I don't know that I have the best answer for you on that one, other than it's a limited duration of a disruption. And I think we all in the same situation that we're trying to deal with the best way that we can.
I just like to add.
I think a number of us are looking forward, I hope, to some resumption of normality with the introduction of a vaccine, maybe in the next 12 months. When is Mastercraft Starwood, if they get approval for this, thinking of putting shovels in the ground?
We haven't really talked about timing, Rod. I don't know if you have any insights into that.
No, I think, we're expecting this process to take somewhere. We talked about, once we go through this process, and we'll go through the site plan process, production drawings. So, at the earliest, it's probably, I would think, a year and a half to 2 years away type of time frame. But I don't think Mastercraft has given an exact date right now. I know this is a priority project with them, but I don't think they've got an exact date set up yet.
The province's emergency order, which allows construction to start at 6 a.m., is a huge thorn in the side. We have a ton of construction projects going around. We've been having some luck recently asking developers who are putting shovels in the ground with building permits to respect the city's bylaw at least, right, and not start until 7 a.m., which is, I think most of the builders have been agreeable to that.
Yeah, I can't see that being an issue. So,
Okay, thanks everyone. Next question. Has the developer considered designing a building which fits into the neighborhood better, such as Westboro Station? It looks like a 1970s brutalist factory. Sorry, Rod.
All right. The problem is we're at an interesting point in the development process. So we're asking for right now essentially a building envelope. We're trying to give sort of images without getting too carried away with, here's a rendering. This is the rendering of what we're going to build. Because, a lot of times if we start the process with this is what we're going to build, it's sort of the first reaction we get from the public is, well, why are you bothering to talk to us now? You don't really care what we say because you've already decided what you're going to build. So I think what you're missing is the finesse of what we're trying to do. And I can show photographs more of sort of buildings that I think just have a different look. I mean, we don't want to duplicate. Much as I like Westboro Station, I think it's actually one of the better projects in the city. We wanted to do something that's just a little bit different, that still spoke to what Westboro Station was doing with that breaking down of this is clearly commercial. This is where something happens. This is a change, begin to describe ownership almost by different window patterns as the building goes up. So we're a long way away from showing that finesse in our drawings because we really want to, we've gone through a UDRP process at a very early stage, purposely to get feedback. And what we did right away is introduce or bring a lot of the comments from that original UDRP presentation. We incorporated right into this design right away. We didn't have the stepping that they asked for as much as what they asked for. So we actually brought that in and increased it. So what I'm looking for as you go through this process, working with the counselor, working with the planning department, is begin to get ideas that we can bring in and start incorporating into the design, so it really becomes more inclusive, as opposed to me it's easy for me to come and say, here's a finished product. This is just lip service we're giving to you, and this is what we're going to do. So I believe in this process that we go through both from a design point of view, sort of strategically through the process, as opposed to coming with the final product. So all I can say is we've been tasked by Mastercraft to do a beautiful building. People may or may not know the Mastercraft label, but they've got some buildings here I'm quite proud of in the city, and also buildings in Toronto with the Hazelden Hotel, the Soho Metropolitan in Toronto. Some beautiful examples. And we've been tasked with doing something quite special in this location, and we will commit to doing that. Sorry, long-winded.
Okay, thank you. Will Richmond Road be encroached by the building, or will all construction spill out onto the sidewalk and a lane of the street, as was done at Scott and McRae?
So Mastercraft Starwood are actually taking a hard look at what the requirements are for staging, and I think that they're going to be coming out with something probably in the not too distant future that will help to allay a lot of the problems. The intent is not to create adverse disruption along the streets in the area, and really try to control sort of where that construction activity and the staging and so on would be occurring. But they're not there yet in terms of finalizing sort of what that is going to mean. But I think it's safe to say that the proponent, that's something that's very high on their radar in terms of making sure they're able to deal with in an appropriate manner.
I will also add to this, usually this comes up during the Q&A anyways, should this should the zoning be approved and the site plan be approved, as part of the site plan, we'll make a condition, it's called a pre-construction meeting, and we'll have that meeting with the community, with the developer. It'll be at a point when they have a lot more information about their construction staging and phasing and the impacts and things like that. So any impacts to the community, we can discuss those further. As well, we'll get contact information for immediately adjacent neighbors to really have like a direct line of communication with the site as construction's unfolding. So we can definitely talk about that throughout the process, and then more so in the future as well.
If I may, this is something that I consider to be really critical as well. I'm talking to planning staff about how we can start bringing traffic control plans with site plan, so that when councillors are voting, we don't have that power today. But generally speaking, we are successful at keeping the construction off the street. If you look around right now at Parkdale Wellington or the Mizrahi development, they're off the sidewalk, and that's critical in a walking neighborhood like ours. The Trailhead development, they were trying to work around the big Ontario hydro lines, and that posed a particular unique challenge. I don't want to ever see that happen again. It was a disaster and a nightmare for pedestrians and cyclists. So I will be along with the community looking hard at the staging.
Thank you, Jeff. Considering the number of vacant retail units on Richmond Road, what would make this location attractive to commercial tenants?
Well, I think this is really going to be more in terms of the marketing that the proponent is going to be undertaking to fill that space. There's no question about it. I mean, we're seeing a big change happening in the retail landscape, but Westboro clearly is still one of the retail main streets that has a lot of heart and has a lot of soul. And I think part and parcel of looking for increasing development intensity, increasing population, is to provide that support to make sure that the economic vitality of these commercial main streets continues. So they will obviously be looking to get a good tenant in there. One would suspect the space is being provided for some commercial activity to continue that street edge animation and retail continuity along the street. And as with any retail street, they evolve, they change, things do change over time. As long as the space is there and you're able to be responsive to what the changing conditions are, that's really what's important.
Yeah, and I think important to realize too is we recognize that we really want to keep the commercial on Richmond Road. I mean, the TM zone in this case stretched down the entire, right up to that R4 zone. There's nothing to say we couldn't have stretched and said we're going to have commercial running all the way down Roosevelt. But we purposely realized early on that you got to limit the amount of commercial and really keep it to a key spot that can be beneficial to the streetscape. I think it's really important that it may be a short-term pain as we sort of rebuild our neighborhood commercial again. I don't think we should abandon it. And so I think what we've done in this case is limited it to key areas, which is, of course, Richmond Road and that corner element. And then as soon as we get any sort of real sort of depth of, I think it's about 80 feet, 70 feet depth of the unit, we switched to residential to strengthen the residential nature. So, we look at the street carefully, and this is right sort of ground zero almost of the sort of the successful retail area of the street. It really is working quite well in this area. So we're hoping we can add to it. And we're talking if we start 2 years from now and 2 years of construction, you're 4 years down the road, and the world hopefully will have righted itself by then. And this is the type of space that will be highly sought after because of the, it's got great street exposure, good windows, good high ceiling, up-to-date mechanical system. So a lot of really positive things. So.
Thank you. Are these condos or apartments?
Right now, we're gearing these toward rental apartments. But at this point, there's no commitment to that. Again, this is such a changing market right now that in a number of years from now, it could be totally different. So I think at this point, where it's safe to say it's a rental building, but it could change in that process. So.
Okay. Any plans to incorporate greenery, using the transitions from each elevation to the next for green planting or roofs, green walls in the foyer, collecting rainwater for using on street level green space watering? Sorry if I butchered that.
Sorry. Yes to all of those. Not too sure about collecting the roof. We tried the roof one, has been overly successful, but definitely we're looking at lots of sort of green, not necessarily green roof technology, but green roof areas that can add to the livability of those spaces. Definitely, as you see with the on the north side where we took that residential lot, we're going to be increasing the amount of green space that exists right now in the current configuration. We've got basically a 25-foot, which would be a side lot to the R4 zone. Right now it's, I think there's about a 4-foot side yard there. So, you know, we're going to be having more green space, more trees in that location. As I said, mentioning that we're going to keep all the street trees along Roosevelt. Seeing if we can add any trees on Richmond Road. I don't know if that's possible. Definitely putting landscape roof areas on the different tiers. So, and we'll look into, like, part of our green initiatives really is look into that watering system and see if we can use it maybe just for tree planting. We tried to use it on another project. It wasn't overly successful, but I'm always willing to look again as technologies get better and better. So.
Okay, thank you. How many vehicle parking spaces?
I'm gonna have to go to the. Again,
I could answer that, Rod.
You got it?
Yeah, I answered it actually in the chat function for another person, but at present we're proposing 115 spaces over 2 levels of underground parking, of which I believe, well, the requirement would be 97. So it's a little bit over the requirement, but of course, under the maximum permitted for in proximity to a transit station.
Okay.
And that includes, Matt, that's your commercial parking, visitor parking, as well as residential parking.
Yeah, so 2 for the commercial space, 16 for the visitor, and the remainder, the balance being for the residential. Again, that's...
Yeah, and those are very preliminary drawings too. Once we begin to carve out our garbage room requirements, bicycle storage, once we really get into the design, we'll probably see losing some of those units. So we'll probably get pretty close to the minimum requirements, I would imagine. So.
Okay. The neighborhood is currently involved in a court case against Domicile, disputing the proposed project for the west side of Roosevelt Ave, directly across from this proposal. How important will it be to have a ruling on that case before this project goes to Planning Committee for consideration? My thinking is that it will be important.
So maybe I'll answer that one because I have some history with across the street. That development obviously is a bit of a different policy context. Whereas the Domicile project is strictly on the residential street Roosevelt and sought to change the zoning from an R3 to an R5. This project here is actually fronting on the traditional Main Street zone. So the zoning is actually in place, and the designation supports the height of 9 stories. So in short, it doesn't impact, and I think staff would echo what I'm about to say, which is they look at every development application and its own merits.
I've been obviously following that LPAT appeal very closely and getting my updates. I tend to agree. I don't think that the staff or the politicians or our lawyers, Tim Mark, are going to require some sort of clarity from that decision. Obviously, I'm supporting the Roosevelt LPAT appeal. Because I feel it's inappropriate to wrap the TM around the corner, but there's like a residential buffer zone between the actual designated TM and the purely residential designation that the buildings that are proposed to be developed as the R5 are, and that R5 is an R5 with a number of exceptions that allow for commercials, such that I think we can properly treat it as if it was a TM building. The LPAT is going to have to make its decision on that, and that's in process. The one thing I was wondering, though, as you were chatting, is there is a portion of this building that you would be adding into the TM. So as you go down Roosevelt, the properties that are currently residential that are added onto this assembly, you're proposing to just make the same TM zoning. That's come up in the 1705 Carling discussion as well. Where you know, I and residents are wondering whether you can do a split zoning just so that that last parcel, formerly the R3, can't be used for commercial, just to zone it as an R3 with some sort of site-specific exception.
That's
I would suggest, Jeff, that it's best to do that through the exception provisions that you might introduce on the TM zone that applies, as opposed to, because then you create a very awkward situation of a building being split in terms of a portion being in one zone and another portion being another zone. You can give effect to what you're looking to do by clearly stipulating through exception provisions that what can happen in that area that's being, that the TN is extending onto can only accommodate what's being shown in terms of residential function.
Yeah, and it's the same as 1705 Carling, where I don't actually worry that it's ever going to become commercial use, et cetera. Like the zoning is going to be so shrink wrapped. But I think I do want to explore with you as we move through this, just ensuring that formerly R3 has some sort of a prohibition against that commercial, because I really don't want to see the TM wrap too far around the corners. Because, you know, we've got a lot of situations like this all across the city, and I think it's important that we draw the line on how far back the TM can go and how far back the commercial can go.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we obviously follow the Roosevelt project as well. I think anyone in Ottawa Development sort of knew the project, and what we saw in some of the hearings that I saw, and is just that commercial encroachment onto Roosevelt was threatening, definitely, along with massing, but definitely. So that's why we were very purposeful in really restricting the commercial to that southern part, and really to where we think it's meaningful, having the residential really start picking up right from this sort of point, picking up the residential, and then obviously in this R4 zone here, keeping it to the 4-story maximum, and in fact, half of that lot is turned over to green space. So, so we're sort of intrinsically doing what you're asking for without doing a split zoning, which is definitely causes issues when you get into things like access to the TM through an R zone.
Right.
You know, you get needing exceptions for that, and so I think we can put in place some, as you say, exceptions to the TM zone.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I know that's in the weeds, but we are across the street from Roosevelt, and obviously, as you say, Rod, everyone is watching that one.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that the planners are going to take that into consideration before deciding whether or not to make a recommendation in favor of this one.
Okay, thank you. What will the developer and the city do to support traffic calming measures on Roosevelt near Richmond? For example, is there parking for business visitors plus 100 plus residents? Where are the commercial deliveries being made? Moving trucks as well. The traffic congestion and speed on Roosevelt is already a hazard. Comment: this will worsen when the towers go in on the Fendor site. It is unclear why intensification near transit in Westboro brings so many new parkades to residential streets.
So I'll start out, and that is really getting into the details of the site plan. What we have is a concept that at a high level is demonstrating how different elements of the site and the requirements for the site development would be provided for. In this case, all parking is going to be below grade for both the commercial, the residential, and the visitor. There's accommodation made for the residential drop-off and loading, sort of on the north end of the site. As we typically find along streets such as Richmond Road, it's not uncommon for loading activity to happen off the street. The expectation is that that's likely what's going to end up happening here, because the commercial is not large commercial, it's very small scale commercial. It's going to be very much dependent on the nature of the commercial and the level of activity. But again, we're getting now into sort of some of the details that would be looked at more closely through the site plan approval process. In terms of the other questions about traffic calming, not quite sure what was meant by that, but outside of making sure that the site can support itself, I think it's safe to say that the developer is not looking at making significant off-site changes, but again, those determinations happen more at the site plan review stage.
Okay, thank you. How many units will be subsidized?
So again, I think this goes back to Rod's response earlier, where the intent at this point in time is for this to be rental accommodation, and it may evolve and end up becoming condominiumized. I mean, again, we're a little bit early in the process. Clearly, a lot of this is going to depend on sort of what the market conditions are like. But in terms of subsidization or subsidizing units, this is a private sector project that's being financed by the private sector. And if there's public money that goes into it, then there might be some opportunity to look at having subsidized unit, but at this point in time, that's not what's happening here. So it would be rental market, or market rental rather.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, just trying to find a question that hasn't been asked already. How does this proposal take into consideration the fact that this block of Roosevelt has only one exit? For example, all vehicle traffic must enter and exit the street via Richmond Road, and that vehicles from the street directly west of Roosevelt, Berkeley and Dominion, also use the traffic lights at Richmond and Roosevelt by driving through the Starbucks parking lot.
So again, the site is oriented towards Richmond. Its driveway is off of Roosevelt. So any activity that would be generated by this particular project from a traffic point of view would be coming in and out of Roosevelt going to and from Richmond. So the fact that Roosevelt does not extend around or loop around, the one advantage is that any site traffic that would be associated with this development would have no reason to go down Roosevelt and would be strictly focused on going in and out of Richmond. So the traffic study is required for this project and is being worked on right now. The indications are that the ability of the area intersections to accommodate the traffic is not being compromised as a result of this project, and that the intersection will continue to function appropriately and at an acceptable level of service. So that's being finalized, and further details will be demonstrated through that traffic study. But it really doesn't have any real bearing on the fact that Roosevelt dead ends or is basically a street that can lead to and from Richmond, and that's it. This project is really directing traffic to and from Richmond and would have no reason to go further down Roosevelt.
Okay, thank you. How will the developers ensure a vibrant retail environment and Main Street feel? There are two recent developments further east on Richmond Road that have seen their commercial spaces remain vacant since the buildings were completed. It does not provide for a great experience to be walking by a for lease sign for years on end. It is also concerning to see that the commercial leases are going to large chains, rendering our Main Street more like shopping malls.
That's a good point. I mean, having been associated with some of those buildings that have remained vacant for a long time, it's very frustrating. I think one of the reasons why this area of Westboro works so well is because of the dual nature of the street. Both sides of the street are commercial. The area to the east is sort of a single loaded street. And doesn't really have that huge neighborhood community support to it. I think this area, Westboro, with the, I mean, I say growing up here, we watched the advent of the mountain equipment company come in here, the co-op, and just change the whole nature of the street, followed up by a number of different projects. And it seems to be just sort of working quite well. And we're hoping sort of to capitalize on that. We're definitely preparing a space that's going to be well suited for retail. And I think we're providing a nice sort of anchoring spot with a real node at the corner. So, you know, I haven't seen Westboro turn into that sort of shopping mall area. I think, you know, there's a few, of course, there's the Shoppers, and we've got some drugstores neighborhood, but most of the part, a lot of neighborhood stores. We would like to keep that in the building and really focus on sort of neighborhood quality stores. I think that's the success. I look at Wellington Village, for example. They've been very successful in keeping Wellington Village more neighborhood in nature to its retail. And we would like to keep that along Richmond Road. So right now, I think the whole industry is suffering, definitely. So it's going to be a while for the retail industry to bounce back. And I think they're going to look at sites like this as ideal sites to have a space where they can spill out their goods. You know, we did a lot of work in the Byward Market, and we used to use the sidewalks there, not just for sidewalk cafes. Unfortunately, a lot of the retail is left, but we, you know, designed the windows to open up so they could actually put their goods out on the street, like a European approach. So these will be designed the same way to allow for that indoor-outdoor experience in the retail. So we're hoping that we can create something that's unique on the street and will be as successful as Westboro Station is across the street.
Okay, thank you. What considerations are being made by the developers for the quality of life of residents on Winston Ave and east of the building? Residential homes on that side will be looking into a wall and will have significant loss of privacy.
Well, one of the things we did was we increased the side yard setback significantly from, I think, 1.5 meters to 6 meters. The other is we didn't project balconies because along with the setbacks, balconies are a permitted projection. So we decided early on not to put balconies along there that essentially would have people sort of leaning over. So that's probably the largest consideration. And we also look, as we begin to develop, probably reducing some of the window size along that, like being a little bit more cognizant of the properties along Winston and how they're going to develop in the future too, because obviously there'll be pressure for those streets to change as we're seeing in this part of the city. So.
And I think also the stepping back that's being introduced along that 45-degree angle. So as you move further towards Richmond, the height starts increasing, but as you move into the neighborhood, the height decreases. So again, it reduces the amount of mass that you would have in behind and pushes that more to the southern side of the property.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for a very clear presentation. I am concerned about going beyond the 4 to 6 story current designation. We have a very bad example down the road at Richmond and Patricia, where tall buildings on both sides of the street result in a dark tunnel along the street. This is not consistent with the character of Westboro Village. And then they go on to say, can you address mitigation of this dark tunnel effect in your design?
That's a difficult question because this is one of the first sort of buildings right now. And right now there is a very strong 2-story aesthetic along the street. If you look at the actual sort of the existing condition on the north side of the street, it's quite a successful retail street right up to Churchill Avenue. I would say that side of the street is a long time away before it's going to be developed, just because of the nature of the successes now. When we were looking at the development, as you mentioned, sort of east of or west of Island Park Drive in Ashcroft projects. That was a very sort of unique space, actually. We were looking at what existed in that area was a used car lot, the gas station of the Canadian Tire, a Canadian Tire store that was leaving, and the Sisters of the Visitation convent. So there was no real structure in place. So it was basically building up a new structure. Where here, the idea of taking down successful commercial space to replace it with even 8-story is definitely people will think long and hard before they do that because it's working so well. I think it's going to be a long time before that scenario develops, but the long-range plan of Richmond Road is just that, basically 8 to 9-story buildings on both sides. I just think the reality of the situation is going to be a long time before that happens, just because of the nature of this space. It's like if you look at Bank Street, for example, there's the only things that are being developed are the funny little car lots and repair shops and things like that. Most of the existing 2-story commercial is pretty much staying intact, with the exception of the, I'd say, the sort of the failing Fifth Avenue Court project, which is really just the area in behind Fifth Avenue Court that's being redeveloped. So I think the strong 2-story commercial is here for a long time. Before we begin into that redevelopment that took place further to the east. That makes sense.
And I think I would add to that too. I mean, I think one of the development principles that we had is really how can you contribute to making sure that you've got a dynamic public realm. I think this property in particular, and there's no doubt that others will fall into the same boat. And we've seen in the Westboro area where there's been sort of opportunities taken advantage of to really create unique little spaces sort of off the main street. And we're doing the same thing here at the corner of Roosevelt and Richmond. Westboro Station sort of took a similar approach. So I think it's a combination of the attention that's being given to the public realm and the interface of the development and how the development defines the public realm, and then looking at the upper floors of buildings and introducing, as Rod described earlier, different materials and utilizing sort of different techniques for setbacks. All of these things, I think, combined are intended to really make sure that as these streets evolve and change over time, and I agree 100% with Rod, I think it's going to be a while before you'll see the full evolution happening in accordance with what the Westboro secondary plan now calls for, where it suggests 9-story development on the south side and 9-story development further to the east. But you've got sizes of properties that allow for this attention to be given to the public realm to really create a fairly dynamic pedestrian experience in these places.
I'm just wondering, Fiona, sorry, my son is showering in the room next door to me. I hope you can hear me. Fiona, could you pull up the south elevation, the view from Richmond?
Rod is sharing his screen.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rod, could you pull that up, please?
Perspective or straight elevation?
Have you got a rent? Yeah. Okay.
Or I can do perspective if you want.
Yeah, I think a perspective. Thanks.
So this is the corner here. This is the corner of stepping right Richmond Road and Roosevelt.
Okay.
Roosevelt along here. Richmond.
It's. I mean, I think the height is coming in all parts of our ward, and we do feel the canyon effect of the Ashcroft building near Island Park Drive, whereas right across the street, I tend to get very few complaints about the way that Westboro Station looks. People point to that as a good one. And then as well, at the Rosemount building that the Taggarts did, where Stella Luna is and New Grocery. You know, again, there's an interesting example of something that puts a lot of density on the main street, but you don't necessarily feel it as a pedestrian. And I think this is something all of us are going to be watching for, is to try to ensure that the pedestrian experience is a positive one from Richmond.
And I think, Jeff, on the Taggart one as well, I think one of the other key things that you notice there is that there's a very intentional public realm experience that's been provided for in front of the old Salvation Army building.
Yeah.
So we've got the higher density building right on that section of Wellington, and then you've got the even higher building in behind. But and then you've got a new high building that's happening on the corner of Parkdale and Wellington. But you've got that little open space enclave, and I think that's what's becoming recognized as being more and more important, to make sure that you find those opportunities and you introduce those types of elements into the Main Street experience.
The clock tower patio obviously provides some of that. So, you know, that's very, very important to me, and I know it's important to the people who are on this call as well.
Okay, thank you. Two similar questions back to back. Roosevelt is already an incredibly busy street. Has there been a traffic study for bikes, pedestrians, and vehicles to understand the impact of this development? And the second question, I'm concerned with the impact of a large number of proposed units on traffic and parking on Roosevelt. Will the city conduct a traffic study with the proposal?
So a traffic study is a requirement, and we're following the city's process for preparing that traffic study. Basically, it's a 4-step process that our traffic consultants are going through. They're now in step 4 of that process, and in fact have produced a report and are expecting to be submitting it to the city probably within the next week or so for the city to review and comment on. And once that gets completed, that would be made available for anybody to read through. But as I highlighted at the outset, the preliminary determinations that have been made through that study is that the traffic that would be generated as a result of this project can very well be accommodated by the area roads without creating undue adverse impacts. Yes, there will be more activity on the street, one can expect that, but not to the extent that it compromises the ability of continuing to appropriately accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Will the 2-story resident adjacent to the Tubman site stay in place or be knocked down as part of this building proposal?
It's to be knocked down and replaced. And in our site plan, I'll just quickly go to it. So this is the area of the 2-story house right now, and it's being replaced with our we call it our rear yard. When I say rear yard, it's only because in the TM zone, the Richmond Road is the front yard. So this technically becomes a rear yard. This becomes a side yard on a street, and an internal side yard. So just the nature of city definition. So the rear yard becomes essentially green space. And then we've got our driveway through into the below grade parking. So yes, it will be coming down.
Okay. Will the garage be outfitted to accommodate charging of electric vehicles?
Yes.
It's an easy one.
Yep.
Okay. This is more of a comment. We are residents on Berkeley Ave and want to thank the development and design team for having come up with a plan that is beautiful and really respectful of the neighborhood while trying to maximize the opportunity for them. We wish the other developers who want to build on Roosevelt would follow their example. I want to clarify that having a 9-story building on the Tubman site is okay because of the current zoning, their east side commercial neighbor and of the suggested architecture. The same can't be said for what Domicile is trying to do by changing the current zoning into a commercial one and having residential neighbors on their west and north side. Did anyone want to comment to that?
Thanks, Mom. No, I think that's great. I mean, I appreciate positive comments.
Okay, that's, I think, it for questions. The questions that remain in the queue have already been answered regarding the commercial space and traffic and the entry and egress. There is one.
If you want, just Chantal and Martin have noted, Jeff, the difference with the developments you are referencing is that they do not abut directly onto two-story single-family dwellings, and that is absolutely legitimate. The Rosemount building backs onto the school property. Westboro Station, of course, takes up the whole block, and it's separated by Byron Avenue from the buildings that are on. It's separated on Byron from the low-rise that is across the street. One of the things that the developer has done in this instance, which we don't see, and which has been, for me, very problematic on streets like Scott Street, we see a lot of towers across the city going up on lots that are directly next to low-rise, two-story, single detached, etc. One of the things that the developer has done well here, I think, is by providing that low-rise buffer to the houses that are next to it. So at the 4 stories at the garage entrance, or possibly even lower than that, they're providing an appropriate transition here, which council has been approving buildings that don't have anywhere near a significant transition. We're also seeing that, for example, on the Clifton development that we'll be taking a look at in a few nights. Yeah, it is right next to single family dwellings, but the zoning is traditional Main Street, and it's going to be kind of tall and dense all the way up to the property line where it abuts. It is interesting to me that the developer has chosen to take that property line as a point at which they are now going to go into the low-rise form. That won't make everyone happy, obviously, but it is a significant nod from, or it's a significant difference from many of the buildings that I've been trying to oppose on places like Scott Street.
Okay, thanks. Also, there is a question, how long do you anticipate construction will last?
I think we would realistically look at sort of a 24-month period, sort of at the outset for a building, and it may be a little less than that, but somewhere in that range. And that would be, let's say, a start in 2 years from now, so, or a year and a half from now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there was also a question that Jeff answered. Someone was asking if this presentation will be shared and kind of like what next steps are. So it seems appropriate to include that information as we conclude. So as Jeff noted, the application has not been submitted yet, but once it is submitted and on public circulation, all the slides you see here will be a part of that application process. This session has also been recorded and it will be on YouTube at some point in time. Once it is on public circulation, you can submit feedback to the lead planner, who is Anne, who is here tonight listening, as well as to our office. If you don't want to wait for it to be on public circulation, you can submit some comments to ourselves right now. And then later when it's publicly circulated, make sure that you send those comments to Anne as well. So hopefully that answers that. I'm just checking to see if there's any last questions. And I believe we've addressed all of these. Does anyone want to say anything or see anything before we wrap up? Any panelists?
Just thank you, Fiona, for being a very effective moderator and for setting this up.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
Counselor.
Jeff, you want to wrap us up?
I think the next steps are the key one. As always, Anne is going to need to write a report several months from now that will make a recommendation as to whether this building is approved or not. The open house, I know people are frustrated with the format that we've been kind of forced to use as a result of the pandemic. It's not an official meeting. I don't work for the city, but it is an opportunity to take a look and get some first questions answered. Once the application is available online, you're going to have a wealth of information with which to make comments. My job is to try to find ways in which this can be improved and advocate with staff to do that. If I'm convinced that it should not be approved at all, my job is to advocate with staff to try to get a refusal recommendation, and then of course to advocate with my colleagues on planning committee for a refusal. This one is unlike several of the ones that we're seeing in the ward right now. It's in the ballpark, I think, of what this council wants to see. It's going to be tough to find the planning rationales upon which to oppose it. Anne is going to take a look at this in the light of our official plan, the secondary plan, the zoning bylaws that are in effect. There are also any number of policies that govern buildings. This will also go to the Urban Design Review Panel if it hasn't already. Where are you with the UDRP?
So we had a pre-consultation with the UDRP, and this will then go through a formal review once the applications are formally accepted. So the applications, Fiona, just as an FYI, they have been submitted. So we're just going through the process of getting them confirmed.
They're just not online yet. So a couple more weeks and hopefully we'll see the application online. And then it's in council's hands as to whether or not to approve a modified version of this or not. I get one vote, and I'll be working with my colleagues to try to make sure that this building is as close to what we want in our vision of the city as possible. So thank you very much, Fiona. I appreciate you setting this up.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good evening,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.